The Houston Texans add depth and talent at critical positions of need. Will this change how they approach the 2023 NFL Draft? Stick around to find out more.
To tie it all in, we want to develop a great team here that we can deliver wins to the city of Houston. We want to deliver a championship here to the city of Houston, and that's what it'll be about.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Wednesday episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager and managing your own football franchise? Then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores today. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On in all caps. Guys, welcome to today's episode. I am John Hickman, and all the way from Memphis, Sports Illustrated's own
still
Texas,
representing the H, baby.
Still representing the H. Texas Credential Media member Cody Davis is joining the show. He's out there to cover the Houston Rockets, as he does. It's been a sad season for him. However, when the grind don't stop, the grind don't stop. And for Nick Caserio in this front office, and later in the week, we got to talk about the conversation that James Limford had last week. I thought there were some good things that came out of that conversation. And so I want us to kind of look at that and understand how the Texans will approach the draft and how they've approached free agency so far. But got to look at the impacts of signing center Michael Dater, linebacker Corey Littleton, which I like, and also tight end Dalton Schultz, along with running back Devin Singletary. We talked a little bit about it on yesterday's show, but I think it's important to take a deeper look at how this team is impacted right now and how this could change, the trajectory of this team when the 2023 NFL Draft rolls around, Cody. And I look at a Dater, 26 years old, right? He's coming here to play center, but he's 26 years old, played all 17 games last season with the Miami Dolphins, but he was only on special teams. He played 76 snaps. He started 23 career games, 15 in 2019, 8 in 2021, while appearing in 57 total games. In 2021, Dater played every snap in 8 games before landing on the injury reserve. 15 of those starts of his career came at left guard. I also want to remind you guys that the Texans did re-sign center Scott Quisenberry to a 1-year deal, and they also have Jimmy Morrissey under contract as well as of right now. Listen, Cody, when I look at the center position, I understand that this is a position of need for the Houston Texans. And when I look at the 15 games Dater played at guard compared to center, I think his best attribute was at center. His best playing was at center. And I would also say that when he played left guard in the NFL, he started 15 games. That was during his rookie year. By the time he was able to play center for the Miami Dolphins a couple of years later, was much better, and I think that was due to the growth in the league. However, I don't think signing Dater should affect whether or not Houston drafts a center in next month NFL draft. I think that this was a security signing. I think that signing Dater does give him an opportunity to claim the starting spot. I don't think Houston has a definitive starting center right now, and that's why I think this shouldn't change how they approach the draft. I think Houston still needs to draft a center. And again, once Miami made the switch for him from left guard to center, he played better, more comfortable at that center position. However, again, a couple of years under his belt, but there are some centers coming out that could change this Houston Texans offensive line within a year or two. And if you don't have a definitive starting center right now, then why should that change what you do in the NFL draft?
And in terms of the NFL draft, John, I really do believe that we're starting to get a sense of what D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caserio is going to utilize the most, of view positions more importantly. Because, and I say that because when you take a look at the running back and the tight end position, before everything that took place on Monday, we thought, including you and I, we thought that Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans was going to put a lot of emphasis on when and where to prioritize drafting a running back, drafting a tight end. However, with the signings that took place on Monday, I won't be surprised if Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans decide not to address any one of those positions in the draft because, like I mentioned on yesterday, especially with the addition of Singletary, not only are you adding depth, but you're also adding talent as well. However, you just mentioned the center position. I'm going to look at the wide receiver position in terms of Noah Brown. I look at those positions and I think to myself, those are two positions where the Houston Texans are definitely going to place a significant emphasis on whether or not when they're going to attack those positions in the draft. And you can say the same thing about the linebacking core as well. So, like I mentioned, I think it's going to be the reverse. I would not be surprised if the Houston Texans go after a center early on in the draft, and they should, given the fact that how the offensive line is shaping up. Later on today, we're going to have an opportunity to hear from Laremy Tunsil after he signed his 3-year max contract extension. Cannot wait to hear what he has to say. But in terms of need, in terms of priority, John, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I honestly do think the top 3 needs for the Houston Texans going into the draft after everything that has taken place in free agency is quarterback, linebacker, and a center.
I would disagree with that. I think there is a strong need for Houston at the edge position. Before this, before the past 7 days, we'll look at it. I thought that it was quarterback, wide receiver, defensive tackle, but they were able to address those defensive tackle issues.
Well, they got the defensive tackle.
Right. No, they were able to, sign Sheldon Rankins, sign Hassan Ridgeway. So those were great signings. But then I look around, you release Mario Addison. As of right now, John Grenard, Jerry Hughes are the only 2 DNs. Derek Rivers that they re-signed got hurt last year. But there's no impact player, I believe, on this roster right now at the defensive end position. And so I desperately think that a part of me, I'm going to say this, a part of me thinks Houston should address defensive end with the number 12th overall pick and go linebacker at 33. And I like Corey Little.
So when do you want them to address?
We're going to talk about Corey Little.
I was going to say when
to talk about him, but I think that is important.
Not wide receiver? You don't want them to address the wide receiver early on? Because all these wide receivers we talking about, Smith and Johnson, all of them going to be gone if they wait too long.
Listen, I believe that wide receiver is definitely a position of need. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. But you got to have somebody to get after the quarterback. You got to have somebody that can fit at that linebacker. Like linebackers now, you got to be able to cover consistently and play side to side, right? We're looking at Corey Littleton. I think wide receiver is one of those positions that is very deep. It's very deep. And so, okay, and let me put it like this. What if Houston does go Will Anderson at 2, wide receiver 12, quarterback at 33? Either way, I know that Houston needs a wide receiver. I get it. But they need somebody in a defense where we expect for them to get after the quarterback. They need a guy to get after the quarterback. They need a linebacker that can play alongside Christian Harris and play side to side, which is why I can't wait to talk about the Corey Littleton signing, because I think that was a good signing. I really do. And so I can't wait to discuss more about that. And today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard us talk about the mobile app game here on the show. If you've ever thought about becoming a good general manager, you got to give this game a try. It's not easy as you think to create a dynasty, a winning dynasty, when you play Ultimate Football GM, you get to control and manage every strategic aspect of your team as you play through seasons and lead your team to glory, trying to build a historic dynasty. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the dynasty of your franchise by doing a couple of things. First, hiring the right coaches and coordinators, managing all of the finances, including negotiating player salaries and terms, and navigating your franchise through free agency, the draft, injuries, player personnel issues, and all of the ups and downs of a season. Our Locked On listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when they use promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On all caps in the game store. Excuse me. So make sure you check it out today. Welcome back, Locked On listeners and viewers out there in the YouTube world. If there are some technical issues when you guys receive this, it's just, again, technical issues due to Wi-Fi, but hopefully we don't lose you guys because having a fun show so far. And we got to talk about Corey Littleton, right? Started his career off with the Rams back in 2016, career highs between 2018 and 2019, 125 total tackles in 2018 with 4 sacks. Followed up 2019, 134 tackles, three and a half sacks. Also that year, 2 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, 2 interceptions. The year prior, in 2018, 3 interceptions, 1 touchdown. Listen, Corey Littleton is a linebacker that I think can make Christian Kirksey expendable. This is a linebacker group, and I've been one of the people who've caught a lot of flack for Christian Kirksey, Cody, as you know this. I thought that when Christian Harris played better, it translated over to Christian Kirksey. And I think that's a fact. Like, I don't think he was, substantially better, but he played much better with a linebacker that was able to do much more on the football field. And that allowed him to play downfield, and that resulted in better results. But when you look at Kirksey, Cashman, Hansen, how many of those guys are just guys right now? And the question is, you need guys, right? You need special team guys. You need situational guys that can give you starters breaks. And I get it. We are only sketching in Christian Harris as the starting linebacker for next year. And so when I look at Littleton gives Houston flexibility to when they want to prioritize drafting a linebacker. I like Simpson. Houston had a visit with that young man last week, I believe. I think he's a player, again, that I think Houston can nab right at 33, depending on how they view this upcoming draft. And I'm keeping the idea of Houston not going wide receiver at 12. I'm keeping the idea of Houston. I know it may sound crazy to a lot of people, and I think they should do the opposite, but the idea of not going quarterback at 2 and maybe going for a Will Anderson. I'm keeping that idea alive simply because in the multiverse of realities, anything can happen. However, with Littleton here on the Texans with a 1-year deal, this gives them flexibility to determine where they want to put on their draft boards how important is a linebacker right now. I think linebacker position for the Houston Texans is very important to address. But I like Littleton. Littleton has had some good years in the NFL after his 2 career high years. Went over to Vegas for a couple of seasons, 82 tackles, 98 tackles in back-to-back years. Then last year for the Carolina Panthers, 47 tackles, a half a sack. Not as dominant as he was during his days with the LA Rams, but he's a good linebacker. I think he is a slight upgrade over Christian Kirksey, and this is a player that with Houston, I look at D'Amico Ryans as a former linebacker. You partner him with Christian Harris, now you can kind of gauge where you think the next best linebacker or best available linebacker could fall to you in certain rounds. Remember, Houston does have 3 third-round picks.
I don't know if it's because I'm in Memphis, but this might be one of the few times you and I have been completely opposite on the show. John, look, I get it. Littleton is decent. Let me just say that. But to me, he doesn't move the needle. In the first segment, I talked about three most important needs for the Houston Texans going into the draft. I say quarterback, I say wide receiver, and I say center. However, I would not be surprised. As a matter of fact, it might be a little bit more realistic to say linebacker at number 3, because when I take a look at Littleton, I'm looking at a signing where Nick Caserio and D'Amico Ryans went after depth and not so much of talent. I understand Littleton has had a very solid career up until this point, but when you take a look at his last couple of years, John, there has been a decline in his play. He has not been as good as he was with the Los Angeles Rams. We saw it with the Raiders. We saw it with the Panthers. And that's part of the reason why we probably are going to see it again here with the Houston Texans. And you already know you got Christian Harris, rookie. He's going to be, I believe, he has the potential to be this team's best linebacker in terms of coverage. However, my number one issue is going to be who is going to be his right-hand man, his partner in crime. I'm under the belief that Christian Kersey actually has a little bit more left in the tank, and I would not be surprised if he is the starter next to Harris come week 1 of the 2023 campaign. I know a lot of people are down on him, but in terms of fit, in terms of D'Amico Ryans' defensive scheme, I do believe that he can actually help that linebacking core continue to improve. And by the way, even though he wasn't in the best system playing under Lovie Smith over the last 2 years, he did give us some solid production. So once again, draft, I would not be surprised if the Houston Texans prioritize linebacker at number 3.
Well, I want to go to the numbers a little bit with Littleton. So with Christian Kersey, since he arrived to Houston, 93 total tackles 2 years ago, 124 the year last season, played in 92% of the defensive snaps for Houston 2 years ago. And then once they moved on from Kamut Grugier-Hill, played in 97% of the defensive snaps for Houston this past season. Now, if I go look at when Littleton was getting the same amount of snaps in terms of percentage, because last year 36 with Carolina, the year before with the Raiders, 57. So if we go back to the years where he was getting the 95, the 94s, and the 90s, he was an All-Pro linebacker. In 2018, that's when he was getting those high percentage of snaps played. The following year, followed up with a career high. In his first year with the Raiders also was a very good year. So I think that what he can bring to the table is much more, again, not much more, but it's more significant than what Christian Kersey can bring to the table with the same opportunity. And so that's why I believe Houston has flexibility, because you don't necessarily have to move on from Christian Kersey unless you want to move on in order to clear cap space. And with Houston being a little bit more tight with the cap money that they have right now, I get it. That'll save them some bucks. So I understand that. And they still do have rotational players who at times last year look good. Blake Cashman, Jake Hansen in his role, Gary Waller, whenever he steps on the field, he can do a multitude of things for the defense. So Kirksey is replaceable. And I think if you're going to replace a guy with a guy that can step in, fill the void, and still help out whoever the future linebackers will be, because I do expect for the Houston Texans to go out and draft a future linebacker. Littleton's only on a 1-year deal, just like everybody else for the Houston Texans. Then he is the better option to do so compared to a Christian Kersey who, again, wasn't as bad as people thought he was after the transition from Kamu moving, Harris coming in. But I would rather have Littleton in his role or in this linebacker group at his stage of his career than a Christian Kersey, who I think you pretty much know what you're going to get out of him. March Madness, the NBA, all of that is heating up right now. And now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook app. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Very simple. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, and it's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even allows you to combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlays. Don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers out there in the YouTube world. The past, 10 days now for Nick Caserio, he's been working. But when you look at some of the free agent signings, Cody, I want you to answer this question. How do you think his approach to free agency will, affect how he approaches the NFL draft?
His approach to free agency has been getting veterans and getting depth. Plain and simple. We've been talking a lot about these guys, and I think in the draft, that is when he's going to go after the top tier talents that not only going to improve this roster and improve the production on the field, but it makes a lot of sense, because if this is still a rebuilding team, you want to go out and try to draft the top tier talents at the position that you need, because top tier talents not only mean that they're going to go out and help improve the talent on the field, but they're also going to be foundational pieces for the organization moving forward.
I look at what he's done so far in a couple of ways, and I'm going to say what I got to say, and I think this is maybe something we mention in the future. But for one, with free agency, I loved it, right? Again, Nick Caserio, and he's mentioned this on many occasions, he's all about flexibility. And I think how he's approached free agency ultimately gives Houston the the leverage in this flexibility battle between players and the franchises, because now he can really see what your value is, and so can the player. But how can you help us with this franchise, and what will your value be to this franchise moving forward? But when I look at how all of this affects the NFL draft for Houston, I 100% agree with you. I think Nick Caserio has done a very good job of adding quality, you are the starter right now talent. You look at Sheldon Rankins, trading for Shaq Mason, Jimmy Ward. Now that Brandon Cooks is gone, I think an interesting in terms of once camp rolls around, who's going to be the number one, number two receiver, number three receiver. That's something that's going to be interesting to me. So he's built a great amount of depth at a lot of positions. Getting Dalton Schultz was another one where now you look at this tight end group and say, you're more complete now. And how I think this will affect the NFL draft? Well, guys, I said I was going to play around with the idea because anything can happen, but I believe at number 2, Houston goes quarterback. And when I look at what he has been able to do and lack thereof through free agency in terms of adding a stud pass rusher, I think that comes into play for Houston. And I also believe that could come into play maybe early on, maybe in the mid-round, that Houston adds a dynamic talent at wide receiver. So far, I think how he's approached free agency with the cautiousness, allowing the market to play out for itself. The market gave guys an idea of what their value is, and teams were able to put contracts out there. Do you want to sign this contract? Do you want to be a part of this team for this amount of money? No, you don't. You think that maybe your worth is a little bit higher. We'll go in the opposite direction. And for Nick Caserio, he was able to kind of snatch some of those players up, right? So you know what? If you really feel like this and your first offer isn't what you thought it was, come out here, come play for us, and let's see how far you can get with us. And then moving forward, we'll work on keeping you around if your value in your mind actually plays out on the field. All of this for Nick Caserio, outside of Andrew Beck and Mike Boone, I'm going to keep saying that, worked out in the favor for the Houston Texans. And I don't think it stops now. I think in April, when the draft rolls around, we'll see a team that drafts a quarterback that's coming in a better situation, arguably a better situation than maybe what Deshaun Watson did a few years ago when he came in for the Houston Texans. Damn sure a better situation than Tyrod Taylor, Davis Mills, Jeff Driscoll, Kyle Allen, or whoever else took snaps for the Houston Texans under center for the past 2 seasons. And so he is building a team. And from day one, during their press conference, whether it was the hiring of DeMeco Ryans press conference, the combine press conference, and I'm sure we'll hear it again, they are all about building a team that can come in and compete. Thank you guys for checking out today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Be sure to check us out on Twitter. Follow us. Give us a follow at Locked On Texans and subscribe to the Locked On Texans YouTube page as well.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.